Hello, everyone. Welcome in. I'll wait for a few folks to funnel in here before we get started. Seeing some familiar names here. Hello. Hi, everyone. My name's Kelsey. Welcome to round 2 of 4 of the ChatGPT series. Really what this is about is instructional AI. So if you wouldn't mind opening up the chat, I want to make sure that all attendees are able to access and use the chat function, but I would also love for folks to introduce themselves. I forgot to do this in round 1. Introduce themselves, just what's your name? Where are you coming from? Maybe your role, so we can see some attendees information. But with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Like I said, welcome to round 2 of the webinar series, the role of instructional AI in education. And as you know, it is January 11th, but with the start of the semester, it's a bit chaotic. So myself, I'm Kelsey Behringer, Chief Operating Officer at Packback, former K-12 teacher, chemistry and physics. Was definitely personally victimized by student writing in that it took for a very long time to grade, and I was horrifically unequipped to grade it myself without support. So feel passionate about speaking about both student engagement and student writing, and of course, joined Packback and supported educators with their implementation of Packback and have loved working at Packback ever since. So Brian, why don't you introduce yourself, a little bit about your role and what brought you to this webinar?
Sure. My name is Brian Arnold. As you can see from the slide, I'm the department chair for a very long name department. I have my PhD in ed tech and ed psych. Huge fan of everything ed tech. Always like approaching issues and topics with it. I've been obsessed with ChatGPT recently, and the programs that I've been associated with have been longtime users of the Packback platform, and so it just seemed like a natural fit. I was invited to chat about it here. I'm really excited to share some ideas and to get some thoughts from you guys. So
awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining. It's been so insightful to have conversations with you. You've helped me formulate my own thoughts and also, I would say, grammar and language around the way that I talk about AI and specifically ChatGPT. So thank you for that. And I'm excited to get started today. And then a reminder for those in the audience, use the Q&A function to ask questions. I have it so that we'll get to them, any question asked by the end of the webinar, but also y'all can answer each other's questions along the way. So use that Q&A feature for questions. With that, what we'll discuss today is basically what is ChatGPT. If you're unfamiliar, you'll get a glimpse of the platform. How can we prevent misuse? Some advice for instructors right now who are thinking about their spring 23 written finals. We're going to talk about instructional AI, evolving with ChatGPT ourselves, and then a Q&A. So let's get started with what is ChatGPT. And what ChatGPT is something much bigger than just chatbot. It is a large language model. What GPT stands for is generative pre-trained transformer. That's a lot of words that are hard to say in succession, so I just like to say LLM. Now, what it really is doing is using statistical analysis, right? It's a statistical tool that is going to predict the next word in a series of words or a string of sentences. So the way that a colleague described it is really fancy autocomplete. Now, that's not exactly what it is, but that's the way that my brain has, learned to know and love ChatGPT. The best example I can give folks is not all heroes wear what? Capes. That is the statistically likely word to follow that string of words. And the reason why it's statistically likely is, these LLMs are fed trillions of words and trillions of pieces of data, and it's just using that database of knowledge. Fancy autocomplete. In action, my favorite use of the platform thus far is asking for recipes. Now, this was an example of needing a drink recipe before I hosted a holiday party, but you can ask it, say, these are the ingredients I have in my fridge. What should I make myself for lunch in 5 minutes? Now, I got this little end of, ChatGPT output hey, I hope these ideas give you some inspiration. And Brian, I thought this was a great example of how ChatGPT can really trick you into thinking that there's a person behind this, because that is so human-like. But really what that is so many pieces of data were fed to ChatGPT in kind of this recipe format that ended with a friendly sign off, right? It's just statistically likely that this sort of text will end with a friendly personal note. And what I did, and why ChatGPT is so cool and engaging, is it is a chat bot. And so what you can do is ask it to follow up with this iteration, or ask for a follow-up to add more information. So what I asked is, can you provide a more detailed recipe for that winter sangria with measurements? And I got that right there recipe. So really cool interface. I've been, in your words, obsessed with it. I would say that people in my family, at my company, are like, all right, hush, let's focus. My mom thought that at one point, I think that my company created ChatGPT because I was talking about it so much. We are not the creators of ChatGPT. We do something very different. But yeah, it is a bit obsessive, I would say. And if you haven't seen the platform live, I have it up right here. I'm not actually going to use it because it keeps going back and forth between crashing and working right now. But this is an example of ChatGPT in action. I ask it questions here, or I give it prompts here. It gives me a continued output. Now, Brian and I hopped on for a tech check, and I showed Brian this input, and this is new. I haven't seen this before, an apology or a note that it can't write a 5-page paper. So when I showed you this, you gave me pretty good insight of some of the limitations of ChatGPT. Do you want to share what you shared with me?
Just when I first started using it, it cut off after 665 words of a response. So that would create some barriers and limitations to it, creating plagiaristic type materials.
Yep, exactly. And it tends to get pretty repetitive, I would say, the more you ask it to produce. So that's a note we'll come back to, absolutely. What I want to do is quickly talk about the reaction in education. So transparently, ChatGPT did not create ChatGPT, or I should say OpenAI didn't create this for students. That wasn't their intention with this. That will not be their intention with this. In fact, I've seen tweets recently from the creator saying they do not want students using this to get out of writing their work. That's not their MO here. But as we know, tools are tools. People are going to use them how they use them, whether it's for their intended use or not. So what I want to do is focus on some of the reactions from educators. I would say that in early December, mid-December, the reactions definitely skewed towards big red panic button. And what I've seen over time is the reactions start to soften, or I would say grow in optimism, as my own have as well. I would say I was initially pretty, oh shoot, is this, March 2020 all over again? And then I started reading more about it, using it, and realizing, oh, this is truly transformative technology if we react correctly right now and in the future. So these are just some examples of reactions that I've seen across the board. It's been, I'm going to start requiring that blue book exam once again. My students are going to be doing oral exams. And then I've also seen folks say, hey, how can we be teaching our students how to use this? Because my favorite analogy is a TI-89 is just a paperweight if students aren't taught how to use a TI-89. And that's what we could say about any great piece of technology, is you need to train the user to use it well. So I want to pause here, ask our wonderful panelist, Brian, when did you learn about ChatGPT and what were your initial thoughts?
Thank you, Kelsey. So I think I learned about it in late November, early December. It had been out for about 2 weeks, and I thought I was showing up late to the party. But my first thought was, wow, this feels like a game changer. And then my second thought was concern for my faculty's reaction to this. Is, first of all, there's kind of this tech initiative newness fatigue that's going on with them. And second, without a fairly nuanced understanding of what it does and what it doesn't, an ability to understand how not to anthropomorphize this as a thinking, feeling creature, but rather a piece of technology that understands and spits out patterns, that it could be a threatening tool to them. My second thoughts were really, in the same way that we already partner with technology, we're using a computer and Zoom right now to talk with each other. We got used to it. We got over it. We got past it. We use our phones to partner with all the time. We're constantly partnering with technology. I think this is going to be a game changer. I think we're seeing the beginning of what it can and can't do, but that I think it's going to take a while for folks to adjust to it and accommodate for it and have a better understanding of it. Since it came out, my opinion of it has become, I understand it better than I did originally. It's not immediately clear what it does and what it doesn't do, but I'm very excited for where it's going, and I'm looking forward to riding through that process and seeing how the world adapts to this new tool that's available.
Yeah. I would say, I was sharing this with you. It's funny. Some folks start with immediate big red panic, and then slowly their mindset shifts as they learn new information. They start having conversations. And that was definitely my journey. And I've also had folks tell me the opposite. They started with like wonder, pure, just big googly eyes. And then they're starting to realize all the implications for the immediate before we start making changes and adapting to the technology of what does that learning curve look like, and a little nervous about it. So that's exactly what we want to talk about today, is that learning curve that we'll all have to go through as instructors, students, folks who support educators, folks who support institutions.
Nice.
So,
one final point on that, as far as understandings go. One thing that I figured out over time is this isn't actually particularly new. The wrapping it in a chat bot and making it available to the consumer level is new, but the tech's been around for a while. So it's really just new to us. Kind of another way to look at it.
Yeah. And I actually have to shout out an instructor that we work with, Missy McAndouey at North Carolina State University. She showed me AI generated text months ago outside of the ChatGPT function. And she kind of brought it to my attention and say, hey, is Packback on top of this? What are your thoughts? And I was like, yeah, I'm not too worried about it. And then it really exploded. So there were folks who were eyeing this technology for a while. So you're incredibly right. This has been around for quite some time. So with that, let's talk about safeguarding existing assignments to prevent the misuse of generative AI. And I almost don't like using the term safeguarding because it's not really safeguarding. What I would say is all of the steps to safeguard are really just making stronger assessments. So let's just hop into some examples. ChatGPT has a few wowing features and wowing capabilities, but at the end of the day, it does fall short in some capacities. And the areas in which it falls short are basically critical thinking, metacognition, and being able to speak on personal experience. And all of those things are where assessments should be focusing their time and energy, right? We should be having strong assessments that force those things. So what we can do as educators to build stronger assessments is require sources, because ChatGPT will actually create fake sources if you add it to cite us or ask it to cite a source. And we showed that exact sort of, function in a few webinars ago. But if you say, hey, include some cited sources, what sources did you cite? It just says, parentheses Joan, and puts it in that format. It's not actually a cited source, because this isn't bringing you factual information, it's bringing statistically likely information. So ask your students to cite sources and, require some boundaries about what those sources should look like. The other thing is asking your students to formulate a point of view. Number one, they're going to want to do that assignment. If they're being asked to reflect on their own experiences or their own opinions, that's just going to be exciting for them. And they're probably going to be less likely to delegate their work elsewhere. But also generative AI, ChatGPT, is not going to have a point of view one way or another. Let's focus on the process as well. Let's have students explain their process instead of just focusing on the product. Let's have students share unique experiences, maybe something that happened in the course. That guest speaker you had, ChatGPT has no idea what they said or why they said it. And then I love the idea of a reverse research paper where you give the student the summary and you have them back it up with data, back it up with sources, and then write everything else behind it. So here are some ways you can modify assignments. I asked the Packback team, a lot of former educators, a lot of folks who love education, hence why we do what we do at Packback, what would they have failed if they used ChatGPT when they think about their own time in higher education? And these were the things that came out. Predicting the future was something that, we found that ChatGPT didn't do very well. reflecting on field experience or collected data is going to be something that's going to be incredibly hard to do without just using your own information and your own brain as a student, and just getting hyper specific. Ben here says, hey, if I had to write a paper on the history of real estate from my hometown in Michigan, not going to work, right? ChatGPT has no idea what's happening in St. Clair Shores. So Brian, you, I would say, oversee, I think, a couple of educators programs in your role. How are you thinking about safeguarding modifying assignments in the spring 23 term so that folks can't just go to ChatGPT or any, generative AI platform or site and get away with a quick input output?
It's an excellent question. And, everyone's going to have their own approach. The philosophy that I like to apply is, the good teaching is good teaching and the technology is a tool. So many of us subscribe to the idea that authentic assignments, relevant assignments are meaningful to the students. So the more specific, like you said, and relevant to what they're actually working on, the less ChatGPT is going to be able to support that, and the more it's going to require from them in an original sense. So I'm definitely going to be having my eyes peeled for issues that crop up, because I don't think we can accurately predict really what this is going to look like in the landscape. We can guess. So I'm going to try to be prepared to approach it with a learning opportunity perspective, and a focus on, this is an opportunity for us to make our assessments better and more relevant, authentic for the students.
Absolutely. I think about the last few papers I wrote in grad school, and one paper that haunted me was I had to read the densest piece of text I've ever read in my whole life. Like, I had to read it, reread it, probably, I'm not kidding, 30 times to understand it and write a summary. And the text was so difficult to understand. And what I actually learned in reading the text wasn't worth all the time I spent reading, rereading. It was a nightmare. Least favorite assignment I ever did. Favorite assignment was, hey, this is a teaching concept. Here's a brief summary. Here's what I want you to do in front of your students in your classroom. Now write on your own experience and relate it to this concept in academia. And that's what I loved, because it was just take your own experience and write a little bit more about it. So to your point, a relevant, authentic assignment, it's one that I wanted to do. It was my favorite assignment, and I ended up learning a lot more in the process than reading that dense paper that, as I said, haunted me. So I'm sure you've had assignments like that before. But let's go ahead and talk a little bit about instructional AI, because I see a lot of questions about what is Packback doing, and I definitely want to address that. Before I talk about instructional AI and Packback, I want to actually zoom out and talk about the pedagogy behind Packback that I love, respect, and drew me to the company when I was considering leaving teaching and still wanted to have an impact on education. So I'm going to first ask you, Brian, why do you think students cheat?
Sometimes it's kind of a black box situation where you don't know what's going on inside their head. But the two buckets I've seen most often, and especially over the last 10 years, they don't realize they're cheating. Sounds silly, but I'm guessing this is resonating with the audience, is one of them. The other one, it's really almost exactly what we were talking about before. They don't see the assessment as meaningful or relevant. It's just an obstacle to get past. And there's no ethical qualm about getting past it in an expedient way, i.e. cheating. So really, those are the two big pieces that I've seen. Everyone has their own real set of motives, but those are the big ones.
Absolutely. And I know in K-12 specifically, I struggled with giving my students an assessment too quickly in the grand scheme of things. So I'd introduce a concept to them and 20 minutes later assess them in an exit ticket. And I just wasn't giving a good portion of my students enough time to actually gain enough mastery of the concept to perform well on that assessment. So they were cheating because they were going to fail it anyway. May as well just look to the person next to me and risk getting caught if I'm just going to fail it anyway. So a good portion of, do they have purpose? Do they have the time to do it? Do they have the skill to do it? Do they know how to do it? All of those are so important to just prevent the cheating from happening in the first place. So that brings me to self-determination theory, which I think there are a couple of analogous theories or systems, but what self-determination theory is essentially what needs to occur in order for students to be intrinsically motivated. Because I can tell you, there was a time in my education career where I was intrinsically motivated and I was doing all of my assignments on time with a smile on my face. And there was a time where I was extrinsically motivated. And that was when Kelsey was getting very scrappy and maybe not being the best me, right? I would never cheat. I'm way too scared of consequences and authority. But, I was doing things like waiting until the last minute or asking for probably help where they weren't going to help me. But what needs to happen in order for students to be intrinsically motivated is three things. They need to have purpose. They need to have that relatedness to the course concept. They need to have some form of autonomy. They need to be able to explore. They need to be able to ask questions and know how to ask questions. And then mastery. They need to understand how to do things. They need some form of success to keep wanting to do it. If all you do is fail, at some point you are going to stop. That persistence is going to drop off at some point. That's why people give up, and that's why students give up and lean on things like cheating. So let's talk a little bit about instructional AI and specifically Packback. What ChatGPT is doing is generative AI. It is generating text and content for students. It is giving the student the fish, is the way I describe it. What Packback is doing is an instructional AI. It is teaching the student to fish. It is not giving students the work. It is having students give Packback AI the work, and then the AI is giving them feedback on the work they've done, giving them suggestions for how they can make it better, how they can have more credible sources, how they can increase their grammar and mechanics on their writing. Instructional AI, again, is all about the process. Generative AI is about the product. What Packback will continue to focus on, because of our mission of critical thinking, curiosity, and writing, and our personal values, is going to be the process so that we prevent plagiarism. So what I'll do is show you at a high level what Packback is, show you a few different tools, and then we'll talk a little bit about the future, because I love talking about the future. Packback is an engagement and writing platform. We have two unique products that can be used together or separately. We have Packback Questions, our inquiry-based discussion platform, as I like to call it, our firstborn child. It's been around for quite some time, used by hundreds of thousands, nay, millions of students. Deep Dives is a newer platform for long-form writing. So think of Packback Questions as your formative assessment. This is going to be a weekly discussion, maybe bi-weekly discussion. Instructor will be fairly hands-off there. Students are in the driver's seat asking the questions. Deep Dives is going to be where you are going to actually, as an instructor, need to come in and assess student on their content and ideas, kind of knowledge and skill there. Now, we do have Packback Instruct, which is a way in which instructors can give feedback at scale. But today I'm going to focus on questions and deep dives. Packback Questions, like I said, is all about students being the one to ask their own question. So instead of the instructor posting a prompt, students are going to ask a question, and then students are going to interact with each other. Instructors can ask their own questions. Instructors can go in and give feedback. They can feature posts. They can spark posts, which is kind of like an upvote. They can engage, but this is really about students building community and having that connectedness. Now, as students are writing their questions, they're going to get feedback on things like, is their question open-ended or closed-ended? We want open-ended questions in this discussion platform, right? They're going to get feedback on their source. They're going to get feedback on their writing and grammar and mechanics, things like that. Now, how Packback AI works more holistically in our feedback loop is students are going to get that real-time feedback as they type, right? We're investing in the process of learning. Once the post is submitted, our AI is looking for things like closed-ended questions, plagiarism, AI-generated text, which I'll come back to, insufficient length, class logistics, profanity or abuse, anything that doesn't belong in an academic setting. We're going to try to find that and flag it. Now, AI is not going to remove a post from the feed. That is not what we're trying to do here at Packback. What we do is have a human team of moderators that review flagged posts and ultimately remove the post if it violates guidelines or just dismiss the flag. Students are given an email and an in-app notification if their post is moderated. It is just temporarily unpublished until they edit and resubmit. So we're giving students the opportunity to learn from their mistakes before they ever press submit. And even if they do have a mistake and get moderated, they have the ability to edit and resubmit. We don't want to punish students during the learning process. We want them to be able to learn from their mistakes before they're actually scored for said mistake. Now, Brian, your institution utilizes Packback questions. You have some connection with Packback questions. You want to briefly touch on, your experience with Packback questions and, how you've seen the discussion platform really benefit instructors and students?
Absolutely. If I may, I'm just going to back up a little bit too. I think the theme of what we're talking about here is that good learning often involves asking the right questions. For those of us that have been through the PhD process, that research question, coming up with the right research question was so important. And Packback really revolves around coming up with a thoughtful and meaningful question. Even ChatGPT really hinges on the question that you ask. So this sort of intersection of that idea, I think, is a very strong point. As far as my use of the Packback tool, when I first heard about it, I was won over and sort of became a champion for it at my institution. We've got it in several different programs. The programs that I oversee have been using it for quite a while. And with any new tool, there's always this is different kind of a thing. But 95% of the users that we have, both the faculty and the students, are like, this is such a refreshing, welcome change. This is so much of a deeper, richer experience because it's driven by the students. The students feel that rather than just being told that. And they're getting that real-time feedback, which I think is such a really essential piece that is stressed by asynchronous distance learning in many cases. So that's it in a nutshell. We're big fans. We continue to use it, and I'm very excited about Deep Dive.
Yeah. Well, I love that, that change is, hard part. And I would say if you're used to using something like your LMS native discussion, moving to Packback can be a big change because you're taking you're putting the student in the driver's seat. You're no longer the pilot of the ship, and that's scary. That's change. And folks who are able to kind of work with that change and process it and ultimately see the results love Packback. And we're kind of at that exact same spot right now as educators and an education system of we are going to need to change. Just like in March 2020, we had to change. So it's going to be, do I resist change and wait? Do I just start pushing myself now to be uncomfortable so that I'm at the other side of this a stronger educator? So really asking ourselves the question of what's the cost of changing too slow or what's the cost of not changing at all is going to be important for educators. Absolutely.
I love that. If I may add to that, when I first heard about Packback, I was like, oh, the students asked the question. That sounds great. I get it. And about 2 weeks later, oh, I don't really get it. There's more here. And again, with the ChatGPT, any of these new things, you get that initial idea, but seeing it play out, it just takes time to fully grasp what that really means in the real world. So
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Well, here's what happened. I was an experience manager for a few years at Packback when I started at Packback. And what that meant is I helped instructors implement Packback, work with them throughout the term, making sure that their experience was solid, and continued to work with them as kind of this curriculum partner support so that they had somebody to go to when, students had questions or they weren't seeing the results they wanted, or they were seeing amazing results and wanted to do more all across the board. But what I heard every single semester was, my students are writing better papers at the end of the term because of the live feedback they're getting in Packback questions. I wish I could just have my students write essays in Packback. That's a phrase I heard over and over and over, and a request is, can I just have my students write essays in Packback? And the thing was, Packback questions was never meant to be a summative assessment, and it never will be. That's not the purpose of Packback, is for AI to grade your students on effort or for you to be able to go in and grade students on their accuracy. That's just not what we're trying to do here. It's supposed to be that formative assessment, that safe place for students to apply their learning, ask questions, and build community. But we know that it's so important for instructors to have tools for the summative assessment. And even more than that, I know from firsthand experience how hard it is to grade a paper when students are misspelling words, have poor grammar and mechanics, and you end up rereading a paper multiple times, the first time just to understand what are they saying, because their grammar and mechanics are well beyond where it needs to be at this point in their academic journey. And then you're able to actually assess the content and ideas. We knew that there was a desperate need for a tool that not only made students writing stronger and gave them immense feedback before they press submit, but also a tool that would help instructors streamline the grading process so that you did not have to grade on your vacation or your Friday evening. I don't know if that's resonating with you, Brian, but Friday nights were a grading party at my house. So what Packback Deep Dives is a writing platform for any form of, I would say, short to long form writing that an instructor would want to grade themselves for content and ideas accuracy from a student perspective. Now, what we're doing is giving this instructional AI, not generative AI. AI is not going to generate thoughts or ideas in deep dives. It is going to instruct students to do things like edit their sentence. It's going to tell them when they're being repetitive. It's going to tell them when they have a hard to read paper, an easy to read paper, when they are meeting the requirements of the rubric or not. The way that I like to describe this is Packback Deep Dives is forcing a student to go to a writing lab as they write their paper, but they can do it from their dorm room or wherever they are in the world. So this is what it looks like for students to actually write their paper. They're going to get live feedback as they type. They can collapse it if they just want to type and then come back to the feedback later. And then we tell them exactly in the text where we're noticing, maybe let's say, hey, you go from first, second to third person. I do this all the time in my writing. So yes, I do use deep dives myself when I'm writing my LinkedIn posts and my emails that are going to go out to the whole company. The other amazing thing about deep dives, and I want to go back to where ChatGPT has this deficiency, is we will give students feedback on their source credibility. So we have this research tab that students will copy and paste their sources, whether it's a textbook, a link, a journal article, and then write some notes on it before they actually start writing their submission. And we're going to give students, number one, the guidance on how they should cite the source, both in their references or in text citations. We give them the format they need to use. But then also we're going to tell them if their source is potentially credible or non-credible and how they should assess sources for the future. The whole MO is that they leave deep dives, but they still take all of these learnings with them. And as we know, ChatGPT will make up sources. So if a student tries to cite a source that just does not exist, period, our research assistant will say, this doesn't exist. And the best part is when you go to grade this paper, you're going to see exactly this right here. You're going to see, are these credible sources potentially credible? So that is deep dives in a nutshell. It's a really cool tool. I'm really happy. We had our first beta users this fall. I think it was about 17,000 students. I need to fact check that one. Utilizing our beta this fall with about 200 professor users. And then this spring will be the first time that it's publicly available to all instructors who want to use it. So very exciting, a lot of users this spring and some good growth. Now, with that, I want to just make it clear and announce, if you don't already know, that we do now have AI generated text content detection within Packback, both in our discussion platform, and it's just now a new flag, right? So students will be flagged if we have detected AI generated text. They will be asked to add and resubmit their post. Instructors aren't notified in this cycle. It's the student edit submission process. Now on Packback Deep Dives, what happens is when a student has submitted their paper and when it's time to grade, you will be given a plagiarism risk. So this is just the plagiarism we've been used to for however many years at this point, but then also AI generated content risk as well. So that is live for this upcoming spring. You can expect this in the platform. Very exciting. And you're going to see a lot of people in the space in the next few days, weeks, months, years. Folks are going to run towards detection. That's going to be a very popular thing. I know, Brian, we were chatting about the student who created their own detector. And I know there are probably at this point already 10 plus detectors that exist out there. There are going to be a lot of them. And Brian, to your point, you had talked about this earlier, this kind of concept of an arms race of we'll have a detector and then we'll have something that gets by the detector, then we'll have a stronger detector. That's exactly what this is going to look like. So what I want to do is talk about a future that actually doesn't place an emphasis or investment or any of our time and energy into detection, but instead prevention. Because I don't know about you, but I signed up to be an educator because I wanted students to learn, not because I wanted to police their work. That's not what drives my own passion towards teaching and education and working at Packback and driving critical thinking. So let's talk about the future and let's talk about experimentation with new types of assessments that require the use of generative AI. So Brian, have you seen anything, or I know you and I are both obsessed, so I'm assuming the answer is yes, but have you seen anything yet about instructors actually using ChatGPT in their assignment process?
No, I've heard some people using it commercially to cut down on time for first drafts of things, but not yet with instructors incorporating it. Again, that time of being an early adopter, getting comfortable, all those points, I'm not sure everyone has rocketed ahead to that point yet.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm with you there. I know I've been using it a lot, like I said, recipes, email, and just for fun too. I ask it to write me like thank you notes and letters to my friends, you know, it's fun to use. So if you're curious as to how you can actually utilize ChatGPT in your assignments, here are some examples that I believe our CPO Jess and our CTO Craig came up with, and I've seen these all over the internet. The concept of asking your students to think about and test the query, so the input, to get the best output. So the product isn't, hey, what's the output that you got from ChatGPT? It's what did you ask ChatGPT? Why did you ask it that? And what changed every time you fed it a different prompt? So it's really about developing the right query. And that's what's going to become very much a focus, I think, of my own personal investment is how do I get the best product of this? Because when I think about folks in content generation careers utilizing ChatGPT, that's what they need to know how to do, is use the tool to the best of their ability. The second concept of be the reviewer, I love the idea of giving students something written by ChatGPT that is not high quality and having them either rewrite it and point out their process of rewriting and document that process of rewriting, or, hey, you're the grading assistant for this course, grade this submission and tell me exactly why you gave it that grade. So again, that idea of thinking through things, really being metacognitive, really being critical of the steps of the learning process. And then lastly, a cool idea that came up was the concept of building an outline and then feeding ChatGPT an outline and seeing what the results were. So again, a creative assignment in how we can actually train our students to utilize the technology. So I saw this question come up in the chat of, does Packback have any sort of feature where students use ChatGPT? And the answer is right now, no, right? And I was telling Brian, I think that we're seeing a free ChatGPT come to an end probably in the next few days, weeks, months. There will probably be a paywall on it on some point, maybe not, but we're probably seeing the free days of this come to an end, but something else will pop up that's going to be free. And I think that's going to happen over time. What I will say is that our team is very excited about the concept of being able to build assessments that utilize generative AI. And if an instructor wants to have this type of assessment, support it. It's not available today, but I would say definitely it's something that we're excited about, of thinking about how we can, teach students to use the TI-89 is the reference I'll keep bringing up. So we are excited about that. And we're also excited about the implications of generative AI in general, not just in ChatGPT. So let's talk about that a little bit. ChatGPT is just one application of generative AI. Generative AI is just AI that generates content. So how can you see generative AI serving educational initiatives in the future and actually serving instructors and educators? So Brian, I'm going to actually throw this question to you if you want to take a stab at it of, so hard right now because there's so much information and the mind can only handle so much, but 2, 3, 4 years from now, what do you think is possible with this technology?
Well, if I was to put on my my future casting hat, for me, I think the biggest implication here is altering the way that we view assessment. And I think you've been hitting on this a few times already, is that what we assess and how we assess it is going to have to shift in a positive way towards more authenticity and whatnot, but also less, like you mentioned, policing these gotcha moments at this very low level, and a lot more about the thinking and the ideas and the comprehension and the skills that are a lot more relevant to the student and the process. And that's going to be because both the students and the faculty can partner with the technology to get past that low level piece, so that I'm not correcting grammar on a master's student's paper, and we're focusing on something a lot further down the road.
100%. And I lost the first like 30 seconds of your answer. I lost internet for just a second, but I'm going to assume I know what you said because
That's okay. No, I just thought I had your undivided attention.
well, I couldn't tell if you froze or I froze, and that is the Zoom conundrum of our lives these days. But I had chatted with you a little bit about this concept of the first time I ever used a VR headset. It wasn't for a video game, which now it's only for video games. I love my VR headset, but the first time I used it, it was for an immersive learning experience. It was taking me to different surfaces of different planets. And that application that I was using was actually generated for the high school classroom. And it was to provide learning experiences that are not possible because we can't put students on rocket ships and send them to the surface of Pluto yet, right? But we can simulate the experience. And what I'm so excited for is that's how I see, I don't know precisely how I see it, but that's how I see generative AI continuing to support instructors, is providing learning experiences that were once not possible. And that's where I get super jazzed.
Having real-time feedback from the AI, real-time idea generation is really great. Being, like you said, being able to simulate something that might be dangerous or costly otherwise, I think those are huge benefits. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had talked a little bit about the concept of in a professional setting, I'm learning how to do something. I can do a practicum, but then I'm having a real human being affected by my learning process. What if my practicum was virtual with generative AI that got better the more I interacted with it, and we're just getting better as we go, and nobody's harmed if I make a mistake? I think that was your point of this safe environment for learning.
Nice.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to go ahead and pivot to a Q&A, but before I, pivot to the Q&A, Brian, I'm going to put you on the spot. You can feel free to just say pass, but I want to know, do you have any kind of closing thoughts or ideas as we are talking about ChatGPT and feedback and coaching and, the future? And, we have a bunch of instructors in the room here today who are about to start their spring 23 term or already have. Any final thoughts or closing opinions as we wrap this up and go to a Q&A?
I'm just going to reiterate that my perspective is that if you can view this and have your colleagues view this as an opportunity to partner and level up, that this could be an amazing experience, and that if people kind of turtle up and get defensive, this could be a very long slog. So, we're all going to make our choices.
Just make the right one. I love it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So with that, we can do a little bit of Q&A here. And I also want to note, if you are interested in learning more about Packback as something that is focusing on that critical thinking aspect, real-time feedback, and ultimately preventing plagiarism, you can reach out to our team at this email right here. But with that, I will go ahead and open up the Q&A. So I believe we have talked about our amazing AI detector. And if you're interested in learning more about the AI detector, we're working on building an external document where you could see how we built it. But essentially what you need to know, if you are using Packback, is the way it works is just using the statistical likelihood of the next word in the series of sentence. That's how ChatGPT works. We just use that model in reverse. Because of the way it works, think of it as leaving a little bit of a watermark of this was written by AI because it's the statistically most likely string of words to have existed. So what we're doing is we're looking for that watermark. And we also look for things like randomness, right? We're able to measure randomness in a sample of text, and we're looking for that. So that's how we are detecting risk. Now, I actually am going to ask you a question, Brian. I said I wasn't going to, I am. Let's say an instructor thinks that AI has written a student submission that they're reading. Let's say you read a student submission, you're teaching a course, you read a student submission. It seems like it's not in that student's voice. It seems like it's not that student's work. What are you doing in that moment when you have some sort of indicator or flag that a student didn't write this work?
Right. So assuming this isn't like the 100th time, I would try to approach it with a learning opportunity perspective rather than a gotcha moment. And as much as possible, sit down with them, probably virtually, and just compare and say, here's what you wrote and here's what this thing is saying. Can you help me understand why it looks that way? And in my experience, most people, again, most people don't think they're cheating, like, oh yeah, well, I pulled those paragraphs off of ChatGPT. Please don't do that, like, so just kind of try to have a conversation about it and redirect for the next time. And as much as possible, I know it sounds ideal, but as much as possible, move in that direction.
Absolutely. And I know every institution or every, district will have their own requirements of how to deal with good old fashioned plagiarism when it's clear they've copied directly from the text and submitted it as their own work. What's not going to probably exist right now is how to act towards AI plagiarism, right? I'm just going to call it AI plagiarism of utilizing this. And so I think to your point, asking questions is going to be really important to our students and allowing them to understand that this was not the intention of the assignment, but then also that there's a power in letting them know that we understand their unique voice and we're not seeing it in this submission. And even just them knowing that you're watching, probably going to prevent that moving forward. But it's also probably going to develop a really solid amount of trust and respect between that student and the instructor, because the student understands that their instructor sees them, hears them, and appreciates their unique voice, right? So I think there is a lot of power in approaching that with a conversation or curiosity, to your point.
Love that. And I think to your earlier point too, is it's probably good to start with checking your institution's policy on that issue.
Absolutely.
And then within that, where you can operate. So yeah.
Absolutely. Any other questions we can answer before we sign off? Right now, Packback discussion grades link directly to LMS, do deep dives grade link to Canvas. Almost. That will be live in fall 2023. So in fall 23, any grade for a deep dive submission will be able to immediately sync back to Canvas and or whatever LMS your institution uses, as long as we have a connection between Packback and the learning management system at your institution. And then this is a good question that came up. Can ChatGPT write persuasively or informatively? I actually don't know the answer to this question because I realize I've only ever asked it for recipes and emails. I do think maybe without directly asking it to write persuasively, it has written persuasively. Brian, have you had any experience with this yet?
My guess is that if you add the word persuasive into the question, it will return more hits related to things labeled as persuasive. It's not, again, personifying, it's not being persuasive, but it will quote more from persuasive sources, those that are labeled as persuasive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like to test ChatGPT a lot. So I would highly recommend, if you're wondering, honestly, take your assignment or your prompts and put it in ChatGPT and see what comes out, because then what you're doing is you're getting an understanding of the baseline of what is it. Is this a C? Am I going to be able to catch this? Would the student just not do well anyway if they use this? Is this an A? Do I need to change my assignment? Did this do really poorly, right? I think that's good to understand what's the baseline result for one of your prompts and assignments. I'd do that now if you haven't done that already.
An important piece too for understanding, if you haven't really used the platform, it's generative, right? So you can give it the same prompt repeatedly and get different versions of the response. I think it's really important for understanding kind of what you're dealing with. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, or give it 2 or 3 bumps of, hey, change this, do this. Like I've asked it to make it goofier. I've asked ChatGPT to make the output goofier about 500 times at this point in my use of the program. Amazing. And then a question just came in. Does Packback allow for revisions to correct for plagiarism and AI generated content flagging? On Packback questions, yes. So if a student is being flagged and then ultimately moderated for one of this, they would be able to edit and resubmit. On deep dives, not yet is what I'm going to say. So it's something that doesn't exist already. The UX doesn't exist for students to I'll do like a pre-flight check. That doesn't exist yet. Instructors can see that in the grading piece of things, but I would imagine that over the next few years, I know I'm already talking to our product and engineering team about what we can build in the pre-submission process to allow students to do, again, these pre-flight checks. And I would imagine, hey, does this pan out as one of them? One thing we've talked about too is if a student copies and pastes a large piece of, this doesn't exist yet, but we've talked about building this. I want to make that clear. If students copy and paste a large piece of text into deep dives, we'd actually give them a pop-up of, hey, it looks like you've copied and pasted a large piece of text. Make sure you're not doing this. Make sure you are doing this. So those sorts of things of what's the behavior of a student who's misusing technology and how could we not catch it, but prevent it, and then also let students maybe edit before they press submit. Okay, yes, Chris. So this is something that I realized today. I think the ChatGPT creators realized what students were doing and started putting in certain prompts, kind of canned responses to them. A good example is ChatGPT from its existence won't do anything, I think, that is like technically like criminal or illegal. Like if you asked it for something that was shady or illegal, it wouldn't do it. And so I'm pretty sure it's kind of putting in that same reaction for, hey, write me a paper on this. Awesome. Any other questions? These are great questions coming in. Happy to be here. Happy to also talk endlessly about ChatGPT because, Brian, we are obsessed. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining and asking amazing questions. Can't recommend enough playing around with it and joining Reddit if you're not on Reddit and just joining threads to learn more about it. Definitely, I cannot recommend enough. Build your community at your institution. Have a peer group you could go to for support and ask questions and get answers. It's going to be a time in which we're definitely going to need to go through the change, but it's going to be so much easier if we go through the change with community. And then thank you so much, Brian. It's been so wonderful getting to know you through this process and having conversations. I am glad that I have a partner in crime who is just as obsessed with this as I am.
It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, have an amazing Wednesday, everyone. Good luck with the spring 23 or winter 23 term. Have a wonderful 2023 year. Bye, everyone.